The linoleum floors of Chicago General's emergency department gleamed under the relentless fluorescent lights, a sterile, unforgiving white. For 6 weeks, this had been Anya Sharma's world, a world of beeps and hurried footsteps, of blood pressure cuffs and IV lines, a world of order. She was Nurse Sharma, first year, fresh out of school, or so her file said. She was efficient, quiet. She did her job, kept her head down, and melted into the background, a ghost in blue scrubs. It was exactly what she wanted. Dr. Marcus Thorne, chief of trauma surgery, moved through the department like a dreadnought parting the seas. He was brilliant, arrogant, and had a tongue that could flay skin. He barely saw her. To him, she was just another set of hands, another cog in the machine he commanded. "Nurse," he'd bark, not bothering with her name. "Celine Locke, 18 gauge now." And she would comply. Silently. Perfectly. Her movements were economical, precise, not a wasted motion, some of the older nurses noticed. They commented on her preternatural calm during a code, the way she anticipated needs before they were voiced. "That new girl, Sharma," one whispered to another over coffee. "She's got ice in her veins." Thorne noticed too, though he would never admit it. He saw the efficiency, but attributed it to the rote perfection of a good student, not the ingrained instinct of a veteran. "Sharma," he said one Tuesday morning, reviewing a chart she'd just handed him. "You triple-checked this dosage calculation?" "Yes, doctor." "You're sure? A first-year nurse, a decimal point in the wrong place could kill someone." His eyes, a sharp, intelligent gray, scanned her face for any sign of doubt. She met his gaze without flinching. "I'm sure." He grunted, initialing the order. He couldn't find fault in her work, and it seemed to irritate him. She was a box he couldn't tick, a file that felt incomplete. He saw a rookie, a kid. He had no idea what he was looking at. He did not see the surgeon who had performed emergency thoracotomies by the light of a headlamp in a dust-filled tent. He did not see the hands that had pieced together soldiers torn apart by improvised explosive devices. He did not see the woman who had once been called the Archangel of Kandahar. He saw Nurse Sharma, and that was how she intended to keep it. The past was a locked room. She had swallowed the key. Here, in the ordered, predictable world of civilian medicine, she could just be a nurse. She could follow orders. She could heal without having to command. She could be small. Safe. The illusion of safety lasted exactly 43 days. Then the storm came. It started with a sound every emergency worker dreads, the high, piercing tone of the mass casualty alert, a multi-vehicle pileup on the interstate, black ice, a jackknifed semi. The world outside had turned into a kaleidoscope of screaming sirens and flashing lights. Inside, the controlled chaos of the trauma bay erupted. "We've got 6 inbound, 2 critical, 4 serious!" the charge nurse yelled. "All hands on deck!" Thorne was in his element. This was his theater. "Trauma 1 and 2 for the criticals," he commanded, his voice cutting through the rising noise. "I want full trauma panels. Cross-match 8 units of O-neg for each. Let's move, people." Anya felt the old familiar switch flick inside her. The world slowed down. The noise faded into a dull roar. Her focus narrowed to a single sharp point. The ghost receded. The surgeon listened. The first patient was rolled in, a woman with blunt force trauma to the chest. Thorne and his team swarmed her. Anya was assigned to Trauma Bay 2, prepping for the second critical. She laid out the airway kit, checked the suction, spiked bags of saline. Her hands were steady, her breathing even. This was muscle memory, a dark, well-practiced ballet. Then the doors burst open again. The paramedics wheeled in a young man, no older than 20. He was pale, his breathing shallow and rapid. A deep, jagged gash ran across his abdomen, and his left leg was mangled, but it was the constellation of smaller, deeper wounds on his chest and neck that made Anya's blood run cold. "Leo Vance, 19, the paramedic recited, bagging him manually. Driver of the primary vehicle, massive deceleration injury. BP is 80/40 and falling. We've pushed 2 liters of crystalloid wide open." Thorne glanced over from Trauma 1. "Get him on the monitor. Let's get a fast scan. Sharma, get a central line in him." Anya moved, her eyes never leaving the patient. She saw the wound pattern. Scattered, irregular, deep, penetrating punctures mixed with severe lacerations. It wasn't just glass. It was something else. Something had fragmented. It looked like... No, it couldn't be. She pushed the thought away. This was Chicago, not the Helmand province. The resident jabbed the ultrasound probe onto the young man's abdomen. "Fast is positive. Fluid in Morrison's pouch." "He's bleeding into his belly," Thorne stated, striding over. "He's bought himself a trip to the OR. Let's get a chest film and a pelvic x-ray while we prep. He needs an X-lap now." Exploratory laparotomy, the standard procedure. Open the abdomen, find the source of the bleeding, and fix it. It was the correct call based on the data. It was the textbook answer. Anya knew, with a certainty that felt like a block of ice forming in her gut, that the textbook was wrong. She leaned in closer to the patient, her gloved fingers gently palpating the edge of a small, deep wound near his clavicle. It was unnervingly clean, a perfect circle. "What are you doing, nurse?" Thorne snapped. "I said central line." "Doctor," she said, her voice low, tight. "The chest film. Can we make it a portable CT?" Thorne stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "A CT? He's unstable. We don't have time. We move him to the scanner, he could code. We need to get into his abdomen. Are you questioning my judgment?" The team froze. A first-year nurse didn't question Marcus Thorne. Ever. Anya stood up, her eyes locked on the monitor. The patient's heart rate was climbing. His pressure was dropping. Tachycardic. Hypotensive. He was circling the drain. "The primary bleed isn't in his abdomen," she said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. Thorne's face flushed with anger. "I didn't ask for your diagnosis, nurse. I am the chief of trauma. I am telling you, he has a belly full of blood and needs an operating room. Now, do your job or get out of my trauma bay." The patient, Leo, moaned, his eyelids fluttering. His gaze, unfocused and terrified, landed on Anya. The chest x-ray popped up on the screen. It showed a widened mediastinum, a possible sign of an aortic injury, but it could also be artifact from the portable film. Nothing definitive. Nothing to justify delaying the OR. "See?" Thorne said, jabbing a finger at the screen. "Inconclusive. We're wasting time. Let's move." Anya looked from the screen, to the patient, to the surgeon. She saw the trajectory. She knew what that wound pattern meant. A piece of metal, a small, insignificant piece from the engine block or the chassis, had been turned into a projectile. It had entered high, near the neck, and was traveling downward. The abdominal bleed was secondary, a distraction. The real killer was hiding, waiting. It was a wound she had seen a dozen times before, caused by the metal fragments of a pressure plate IED. The fragment would tumble, nicking organs, causing confusing symptoms before finally finding its way to the one place that guaranteed death: the heart. He wasn't bleeding into his abdomen. He was bleeding into his chest, into the pericardial sac, cardiac tamponade. The pressure was building, crushing his heart, preventing it from beating. The laparotomy would kill him. The anesthesia would drop his pressure. The positive pressure ventilation would decrease his venous return, and his heart would stop. He would die on the table before they even made the first incision. She had been on the job for 6 weeks. She looked the surgeon in the eye and said, "No, The word hung in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. The entire room went silent. The only sounds were the escalating alarms from the patient's monitor. Thorne's face went from red to a dangerous pale white. His jaw was clenched so tight, a muscle jumped along its line. "What did you just say to me?" he whispered, his voice lethally soft. I could just let it go. Let him take the boy to the OR. It would be his call, his failure. I could keep my life, my quiet, anonymous life. I could remain a ghost. She looked down at Leo Vance, at the fear in his young eyes, the same fear she'd seen in the eyes of countless soldiers, and the ghost died. The surgeon was back. "I said no," Anya repeated, her voice ringing with an authority that stunned everyone, including herself. "You take him to the OR for a laparotomy, and he will be dead in 5 minutes. The patient's monitor screamed a continuous tone. Ventricular tachycardia. "He's in VTACH!" the resident yelled. "No pulse!" "Start compressions," Thorne ordered, finally breaking his stare from Anya. "Get the paddles. Charge to 200. Anya shoved the resident aside. "No, do not shock him, and stop compressions." "Are you insane?" Thorne roared. "He's in cardiac arrest." "He's not in arrest. He has an obstructive shock," she countered, her voice a whip crack. "It's tamponade. The compressions are doing nothing but making it worse. You're pushing against a heart that's already being crushed." She grabbed a large bore needle and a syringe from the cart. "What do you think you're doing?" Thorne demanded, moving to stop her. Anya turned, her body blocking him. The look in her eyes was something he had never seen before. It was ancient, hard. It was the look of a commander on a battlefield. "I am saving your patient's life," she said. "Now get out of my way." He actually took a step back. She plunged the needle into the chest of Leo Vance, just below the xiphoid process, aiming for the pericardial sac. It was a blind pericardiocentesis, a dangerous last-ditch maneuver. She pulled back on the plunger. "Nothing. It's clotted," she muttered, a curse under her breath. "The blood has clotted off. It's too late for this." The monitor flatlined, a long, final, soul-destroying tone. "He's gone," the resident said, his voice hollow. Thorne stared at the flat line, his face a mask of defeat and fury. He looked at Anya, his eyes burning with accusation. "You did this." Anya ignored him. She was already moving. "Not yet, he isn't," she said. She grabbed a scalpel from the suture tray. "Get me a thoracotomy tray and a giggly saw, now." "A thoracotomy?" "Here," the charge nurse stammered. "In the bay. We can't do that." "We can, and we will," Anya commanded. She turned to Thorne, her gaze pinning him in place. "Dr. Thorne, you have 2 choices. You can stand there and watch this boy die, or you can help me save him. Your call." For a second, Thorne looked like he was going to have her physically removed, but then he saw it again. The absolute, unwavering certainty in her eyes. It wasn't arrogance. It was knowledge. He saw the scalpel in her hand, held not like a nurse, but like an extension of her own body. "Get her the damn tray," he bellowed at the stunned team. The spell was broken. The room exploded into motion. Anya didn't wait. She made a sweeping incision with the scalpel between the 4th and 5th ribs, from the sternum to the back. A clean, deep, anterolateral thoracotomy. Blood welled up, but she ignored it. "Rib spreaders." A nurse slapped them into her hand. Anya inserted them and cranked them open, exposing the thoracic cavity. The boy's left lung, deflated, fell away. And there it was. The pericardial sac. It was swollen, dark purple, and tight as a drum. It wasn't beating. Scissors. She nicked the pericardium. Dark, clotted blood oozed out. She opened the sac fully. A torrent of old blood and fresh clots spilled onto the gurney. The heart, finally released from its prison of pressure, gave a weak, pathetic flicker. "It's fibrillating," she said. She reached her hand into the boy's chest, her fingers wrapping around his heart. It felt like a stunned bird in her palm. She began internal cardiac massage. Squeeze, release. Squeeze, release. A steady, rhythmic pump. "Give me the internal paddles. Charge to 20 joules. Thorne, his face ashen, held the small, spoon-like paddles. "Ready. Clear." She lifted her hand. Thorne placed the paddles directly on the heart and delivered the shock. The muscle convulsed. On the monitor, a sinus rhythm appeared. A slow, steady beep. 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 The most beautiful sound in the world. "We have a rhythm," Anya said, her voice dropping, the adrenaline beginning to recede. "BP is 60/30, but it's there. He's back." She kept her eyes on the heart, searching. There, her finger pointed to a small, dark tear on the surface of the right ventricle. And sticking out of it, barely visible, was the tip of a metallic object. "That's our culprit," she said. "Suture. 3-O-proline on a tapered needle." A nurse, her hands trembling slightly, passed her the needle driver. With the boy's heart still beating in her hand, Anya placed a single, perfect stitch, closing the hole. The bleeding stopped instantly. She used a suction catheter to clear the remaining blood from the chest cavity. "Let's get a chest tube in, and then we can move him to the OR to close properly." The room was silent, save for the steady beep of the monitor. The entire team, nurses, residents, even Thorne, stared at her, their faces a mixture of awe, confusion, and disbelief. She had just performed a resuscitative thoracotomy, one of the most extreme procedures in medicine, in a trauma bay, with a scalpel and a rib spreader, and saved a boy who was clinically dead. She was a first-year nurse. Thorne finally found his voice. It was a hoarse whisper. "Who in the hell are you?" Later, in the surgical lounge, the air was thick with unspoken questions. Leo Vance was stable in the ICU, his surgery a simple matter of closing the chest once Anya had done the impossible. Thorne sat opposite her, a cup of coffee untouched in his hands. He hadn't said a word since they left the trauma bay. He just watched her. He had spent the last hour on the phone with the hospital administration and the nursing school she supposedly graduated from. "Your file is a ghost," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Anya Sharma, graduated top of her class from Johns Hopkins Nursing. Stellar recommendations. No fellowships, no prior experience. You appeared out of thin air 6 months ago." Anya said nothing. She just sipped her water, her hands perfectly steady. "What you did back there," Thorne continued, shaking his head. "That wasn't nursing. That wasn't even surgery. That was something else. The economy of motion, the absolute lack of hesitation. You've done that before. Many times." She met his gaze. "I did what was necessary." "Necessary? You cracked a man's chest open in an ER. Most trauma surgeons, good ones, go their whole careers without doing a successful one. You did it like you were putting in a damn IV." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I owe you an apology, and my patient owes you his life. But I need to know who you are. The hospital needs to know. You can't just do that and then go back to taking temperatures." Before she could answer, the door to the lounge opened. A man in the crisp, decorated uniform of a Navy admiral strode in, flanked by 2 serious-looking men in suits. His face was etched with worry, but his eyes were sharp and analytical. "I'm Admiral Vance," he announced, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. "I'm looking for the doctor who saved my son." Thorne stood. "Admiral, I'm Dr. Thorne, Chief of Trauma. The Admiral's eyes swept past him and landed on Anya. He had clearly been briefed. "You," he said, walking towards her. "They told me a nurse saved him. They said you performed a field thoracotomy." Anya stood slowly. Your son is stable, Admiral. He has a long recovery ahead, but the prognosis is good. Field thoracotomy, the Admiral repeated, the words tasting foreign in the sterile hospital environment. That's a combat medicine term. He scrutinized her, his gaze missing nothing. You're no nurse. It wasn't a question. The truth was out. There was no putting it back in the box. No, Anya said softly. I'm not. Then who are you? Thorne demanded, his patience finally snapping. Anya took a deep breath. The locked room in her mind creaked open. My name is Dr. Anya Sharma, she said, her voice clear and steady. I was a major in the United States Army, forward surgical team commander and lead trauma surgeon, attached to Joint Special Operations Command. The silence in the room was absolute. Thorne looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Admiral Vance's eyes widened in recognition. JSOC, the Admiral breathed. Tier 1 assets. You were in the black sites. I served where I was assigned, Anya said, her voice carefully neutral. The Archangel, Vance whispered, the pieces clicking into place. I've heard stories, legends mostly. A surgeon working miracles in classified locations. They said you could pull men back from the gates of hell. He looked from her to Thorne and back again. They also said you vanished, dropped off the face of the earth 2 years ago. I retired, Anya said simply. People like you don't retire, Vance countered. They get disappeared, or they get killed. Why are you here, Dr. Sharma, pretending to be a nurse? That was the question she had been running from, the reason she had buried herself in anonymity. I lost a patient, she said, the words tasting like ash. A boy, younger than your son. A catastrophic blast injury. I did everything I could, everything I was trained to do. But I lost him, and 3 others on my table that night. Her voice faltered for the first time. The memory was a physical weight. The smell of dust and blood, the screams, the feeling of utter, complete failure. It was my fault, she whispered. A miscalculation, a moment's hesitation. I couldn't hold the knife anymore. Not when my hands were responsible for their deaths. Thorne stepped forward, his earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by a profound, dawning respect. Dr. Sharma, Anya, every surgeon loses patience. It's part of the job. You can't let it. It wasn't just that. She cut him off, her gaze distant. There were other factors, complications, things I wasn't supposed to know. After that night, it was suggested, very strongly, that I take an extended and permanent leave of absence, that I find a quiet life. You were silenced, Vance stated, his eyes hard as flint. You saw something you weren't supposed to see. Anya didn't confirm or deny it. She just looked down at her hands, the hands that had saved Leo Vance, the hands she had believed were stained beyond redemption. I needed to stop being a weapon, she said. I just wanted to be a healer again, starting from the beginning, following orders, no life or death decisions, just helping. The quiet beep of a pager interrupted the heavy silence. It was one of the Admiral's aides. He listened intently to his earpiece, and his face went pale. Admiral, the aide said, his voice urgent. We have a situation. Hospital security has been overridden. There are 2 men at the main entrance. They're asking for Dr. Sharma, by name. Admiral Vance looked at Anya. They know you're here. Anya felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with medicine. The system she used, the specific internal cardiac massage technique combined with the suture method, it was her signature. A fingerprint left in a medical database that was monitored. She had been found. Who are they? Thorne asked. He's here, Anya said, her voice barely a whisper. My old CO, Colonel Reed. Lock down this floor, Admiral Vance ordered his aide. No one gets in or out without my direct authorization. Get me a secure line to the Pentagon." He turned to Anya. "It seems your quiet life is over, Doctor. The question is, what do you do now?" The choice was stark. Run again, disappear deeper, or stay and face the man who had broken her. I ran once. I buried myself, hoping the ghosts would stay buried with me. But they don't. They follow. They wait. And today, I saved a boy's life because of who I was, not in spite of it. The skills I tried to forget are the only things that mattered. She looked at Thorne, who was watching her with a newfound reverence. She looked at Admiral Vance, a man of power who was now, in a way, indebted to her. She was no longer alone. "I'm done running," she said. Colonel James Reed was a man who seemed to have been carved from granite and ice. His uniform was immaculate, his posture ramrod straight, and his eyes were devoid of warmth. He radiated an aura of absolute, unquestionable authority. He wasn't flanked by military police. The two men with him wore expensive, ill-fitting suits that did little to hide the hardware beneath their jackets. They were agency. Spooks. They had cordoned off the entire surgical wing. Reed found them in the ICU waiting room, a space that now felt like a cage. "Major Sharma," Reed said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. He ignored Thorne and the Admiral completely. A surprising and, I must say, reckless reappearance. Cracking a civilian's chest open? A bit dramatic, even for you. "He's alive, Colonel," Anya replied, her voice steady. She would not let him see her fear. A fortunate side effect, Reed dismissed. "You left a digital footprint that lit up 3 separate watch lists. You know the terms of your separation agreement. Total disengagement. Anonymity. You violated that agreement." "This is a civilian hospital, Colonel," Admiral Vance interjected, stepping forward. "And Dr. Sharma is under my protection. Whatever authority you think you have ends at that door." Reed finally acknowledged him, a flicker of annoyance in his cold eyes. "Admiral Vance, your son is a lucky boy. But this does not concern you or the regular Navy. This is a matter of national security." "Everything concerning my personnel and my facilities concerns me," Vance shot back. "And as of this moment, I am considering Dr. Sharma a consultant to the United States Navy Medical Corps." Anya looked at the Admiral, stunned. He had just created a shield for her out of thin air. Reed almost smiled. It was a chilling sight. A commendable, if futile, gesture. Dr. Sharma is not a civilian consultant. She is, and always will be, an asset of my program. A program you are not cleared to know about. He turned his full attention back to Anya. "We are reactivating you, Doctor. There is a situation. Your specific talents are required." "No," Anya said. The word was quiet, but it was steel. "That is not a word I accept," Reed said calmly. "You think you can hide in this mundane world, changing bedpans and fluffing pillows? You are a scalpel, Doctor, the finest I have ever seen. And a scalpel does not belong in a drawer. It belongs in the hand of its master." "I am not your tool," Anya said, her voice rising. "What you do in those black sites, it isn't medicine. It's vivisection. It's patching up assets so they can be sent back into the meat grinder, or worse, interrogating them medically. I will not be a part of that. Not anymore." "You're referring to Operation Nightfall," Reed said, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "The operation where you so spectacularly failed, where you lost 4 high-value targets on your table." "I didn't fail," Anya whispered, the old wound tearing open. "Oh, but you did," Reed pressed, his words like surgical probes. "You let sentiment get in the way. You tried a heroic new technique to save a soldier who was already dead, wasting precious minutes while the other 3 bled out. Your ego cost us millions in assets and intelligence." Thorne, who had been listening with growing horror, finally spoke. That's a lie. I saw her work. There is no ego. There is only pure, instinctual skill. She doesn't hesitate. She acts. Reed waved a dismissive hand. What you saw was a parlor trick, Dr. Thorne. You have no concept of the pressures she operated under. But Reed's words had an unintended effect. They were meant to break her, to reinforce the guilt she had carried for 2 years. Instead, they sparked a question. Wasting precious minutes. The other 3 had been stabilized. They were stable when she started on the 4th man, the one with the catastrophic injuries. They had crashed simultaneously, systematically. It had never made sense. The blood, Anya said, her eyes widening as the memory replayed in her mind, this time not with guilt, but with suspicion. The blood supply. It was tainted. Reed's expression didn't change, but a new stillness came over him. The walking blood bank, Anya continued, thinking aloud. The soldiers we used for fresh whole blood transfusions, their blood types were triple-checked. But the men I lost, they all went into DIC, disseminated intravascular coagulation. It was like their blood turned to water. It shouldn't have happened. The tragic chaos of war, Doctor, Reed said smoothly. No, Anya said, her voice gaining strength. It was deliberate. Someone contaminated the transfusion bags. Those men weren't lost because of my hesitation. They were assassinated on my operating table. She looked straight at Reed. It was a setup. You needed them gone. They knew something. And you used me. You framed me, made me believe I had failed, so I would break. So I would run and bury your secret for you. The truth settled in the room, monstrous and undeniable. Reed's cold composure finally cracked. A flicker of something dark and violent crossed his face. You were always too smart for your own good, Sharma. So it's true, Admiral Vance said, his voice dangerously low. You murdered 4 American soldiers and used one of this country's finest surgeons as your scapegoat. They were acceptable losses, Reed hissed. And she is a necessary asset. She is coming with me. Now. The men in suits shifted, their hands moving inside their jackets. Anya stood her ground. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, burning rage. He had not only stolen her career and her peace of mind, he had desecrated the memory of the men she had sworn to save. You have a choice, Reed, she said, her voice ringing with a newfound power. You can try to take me by force, and Admiral Vance will ensure this entire hospital becomes a crime scene that not even your agency can scrub. Or you can walk away. I don't walk away, Reed snarled. You will this time, Anya said, because I know about your condition, the one you hide from your superiors, the inoperable cavernous angioma at the base of your brainstem, the one that causes those cluster headaches you mask with caffeine and rage, the one that will, sooner or later, rupture and kill you. Reed froze, his face a mask of shock. I read your private medical file, Anya continued, pressing her advantage. The one you kept locked in your field safe. I was your doctor, remember? I know your secrets, all of them. And if you take one more step, I will make a single phone call to the Surgeon General. Your career, your program, everything you've built will be over. You will be grounded, disgraced, and left to wait for that ticking time bomb in your head to go off. It was a perfect checkmate. She had used his own methods against him, information as a weapon. Reed stared at her, his eyes filled with a hatred that was almost pure. He saw before him not the broken, guilt-ridden ghost he had created, but the archangel, risen and formidable. He turned without another word, his men falling in behind him, and swept out of the room. The crisis was over. Anya felt her legs tremble, the strength that had sustained her finally ebbing away. Thorne steadied her with a hand on her arm. It's over, he said softly. You're safe. She looked up at him, and then at the Admiral. She was free. Free from Reed, free from her past, and most importantly, free from the lie she had been forced to believe about herself. She wasn't a failure. She was a survivor. A week later, Anya stood in a conference room overlooking Lake Michigan. She wore a crisp blazer and slacks, not scrubs. Dr. Thorne stood beside her. Across the table sat Admiral Vance and the board of directors for Chicago General Hospital. What Colonel Reed and his shadow organization did was an act of treason, the Admiral was saying. It is being dealt with at the highest levels. But that leaves us with the question of Dr. Sharma. He turned to her. You are, without a doubt, one of the most gifted trauma surgeons I have ever encountered. Your skills are wasted anywhere but at the forefront of medicine. We, the Navy and Chicago General, would like to make you a proposal. The hospital administrator slid a thick portfolio across the table. Anya opened it. The cover read, The Vance Center for Advanced Combat Trauma and Surgical Innovation. A joint venture, the administrator explained. We provide the facilities and the research grants. The Navy provides funding, personnel, and access to their toughest cases. A place to treat wounded veterans with cutting-edge techniques, and a place to train the next generation of military and civilian trauma surgeons. We don't want you to be a surgeon here, Doctor, Admiral Vance said, a smile touching his lips for the first time. We want you to build it, to run it, to lead it. We want you to be its director. Thorne placed a hand on her shoulder. They asked me who I'd recommend to run the new trauma program. I told them there was only one choice. But I said I wouldn't do it unless you were my boss, he grinned. I think I'd make a decent deputy director. Anya looked at the proposal, at the faces of the people in the room. They weren't just offering her a job. They were offering her a purpose, a way to merge the two halves of her life, the ghost surgeon of the battlefield and the quiet nurse of the sterile wards, a way to honor the men she'd lost by saving the ones who were yet to come. My name is Anya Sharma. I was a weapon. I was a ghost. I was a healer in hiding. But today, I am a leader. She closed the portfolio and looked across the table, her eyes clear and bright with a fire that had been banked for far too long. I accept, she said, on one condition. Name it, the Admiral said. My first order of business, she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her face, is to formally apologize to Dr. Thorne for questioning his authority in his own trauma bay. The room erupted in laughter. Thorne shook his head, a look of profound admiration on his face. 6 months later, Dr. Anya Sharma stood in the observation dome above the newly opened Vance Center's primary training theater. Below her, Dr. Thorne was guiding a group of young Navy surgeons through a complex simulation, using techniques Anya herself had pioneered. She was no longer hiding. Her name was on the wall. Her past was not a source of shame, but a foundation of strength. She had saved Leo Vance, confronted her monster, and in doing so, had reclaimed not just her name, but her very soul. The ghost was gone for good. In its place stood a woman who had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged. She was a commander, a teacher, a healer. She was exactly where she was supposed to be.